It begins on a night that should have been silent. But silence can hide things far worse than screams. In the town of Williamsburg, Virginia, Lebame 6, the streets were damp from an earlier rain, the air heavy with the smell of wet cobblestone and burning tallow candles. Somewhere beyond the market square, a carriage moved too fast, its wheels slick on the stones. Moments later, the sound of splintering wood and shattering glass tore through the night. By dawn, two bodies lay cold, the respected Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, crushed beneath the wreckage. People whispered that it was an accident. Horses spooked. Driver lost control. A tragedy, nothing more. But some swore they had seen a figure standing in the alley, just before the crash, tall, still, watching. And so, at just 14 years old, Elizabeth Hartwell was left without parents, without protection. That was when Jonathan Caldwell appeared. He told the townsfolk it was God's will that he take the girl in. He spoke with the authority of wealth, his words dripping with the kind of charm that makes people nod before they think. Jonathan owned ships, land, and half the warehouses by the port. Men respected him. Women admired him. Nobody questioned him. For Elizabeth, grief blurred the days. Caldwell's home was grand, lined with shelves of leather-bound books, the air heavy with the scent of imported tobacco. Servants moved quietly, never meeting her eyes. At night, the halls felt too wide, too empty, as if the house was listening. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss these dark historical mysteries. And tell us in the comments, what state are you listening from? We love hearing from our viewers across America. Weeks turned to months. Caldwell kept her inside, away from the marketplace, away from friends. He told her the outside world was dangerous for a young girl alone. He spoke of loyalty, duty, gratitude. He began choosing her dresses, her books, even the music she was allowed to hear. And then there was the study, a locked door she was never allowed to enter. But once, passing by, she thought she heard two men talking inside. One voice was Caldwell's, the other was unfamiliar, low and sharp. She only caught one phrase before footsteps approached, and she hurried away. Her bloodline is perfect. Elizabeth could not forget those words. Perfect bloodline. They looped in her mind for days, souring the taste of her food and stealing her sleep. She tried to convince herself she'd misheard, but the way Caldwell looked at her now felt different. His smile seemed heavier, as if hiding a second meaning. The townsfolk saw none of this. To them, she was the lucky orphan taken in by a pillar of the community. But within Caldwell's mansion, luck felt like a gilded cage. Every door had a key, and Caldwell carried them all. Servants moved like shadows, silent, trained not to speak. She noticed bruises on one maid's wrist, but the woman refused to meet her eyes when she asked about it. One stormy night, Elizabeth lay awake, listening to the rain drum against the window. A faint, clinking sound came from below, rhythmic, metallic. Curiosity pulled her from bed. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and crept to the staircase. The clinking grew louder as she descended, mingling with the low murmur of voices. The sound led her to the study, the forbidden door. A sliver of light glowed beneath it. She pressed her ear to the wood. Caldwell's voice, calm but commanding. It must be soon. She's almost of age. The others didn't last this long. The other voice answered, a rasping tone that made her skin crawl. We need her before the alignment, or the blood turns useless. A sudden thud from inside startled her. She stepped back just as the door handle rattled. Heart pounding, she darted into the nearest hallway, flattening herself against the wall. Caldwell emerged, holding a small black box in one hand. His eyes scanned the hall, lingering for a second too long before he walked away. Elizabeth waited until his footsteps faded before retreating to her room. She sat on the bed, staring at the shadows dancing on the wall, her pulse still hammered in her ears. This was no simple act of guardianship. Whatever Caldwell wanted, it wasn't kindness and perfect bloodline. What could that mean? By morning, she resolved to find out. But she had no idea that the truth would lead her far beyond locked doors and into a history that the colonies had tried to bury forever. 2 days later, Elizabeth began her quiet investigation. She knew the mansion had one place where Caldwell kept his most private belongings, the locked library on the east wing. Only Caldwell and his butler, Mr. Hawthorne, had keys. She waited until midday, when Caldwell left for one of his meetings in town, and Hawthorne retreated to the kitchen. Slipping down the east corridor, she pressed her ear against the heavy oak door. Silence. She tried the handle. Locked. Elizabeth remembered seeing Caldwell place his keys on the hall table while removing his gloves. When she returned to that table, only one key sat in the dish, a thin brass one, different from the rest. She took it, her hands trembling. The key fit perfectly. The library opened with a groan, releasing a stale scent of old paper, leather, and dust. Tall shelves rose to the ceiling, but the room's center drew her attention. A large desk littered with charts, anatomical sketches, and parchment covered in strange symbols. She picked one up. It was a family tree, not of the Caldwell family, but of several bloodlines, all connected to a single surname she didn't recognize, Ashworth. Her own name was written at the bottom, circled in red ink. Her breath caught. Shuffling through the papers, she found something worse, a ledger listing dates, ages, and short notes beside each name. Many ended with the word expired. Others simply read, ritual incomplete. Before she could process it, her eye caught on a locked cabinet in the corner. The key didn't fit, but the lock was fragile. A quick pull with the poker from the fireplace snapped it open. Inside were jars, rows of them, each containing dried flowers, strange stones, and something far more disturbing, small vials labeled with names from the ledger. The liquid inside was deep red. Footsteps echoed in the hall. Elizabeth froze, heart racing. She shoved the ledger under her shawl and slipped the brass key back into her pocket. The library door creaked as it closed behind her. She ducked into a side passage just as Hawthorne's shadow appeared at the corridor's end. She didn't know exactly what Caldwell was doing, but she now understood one thing. Whatever perfect bloodline meant, she was not the first. And if she stayed, she wouldn't be the last. That night, Elizabeth barely slept. Every creak of the old mansion felt amplified, every gust of wind a whisper she could almost understand. She replayed the ledger in her mind, the names, the dates, the blood-red ink circling her own name. At dawn, she decided she couldn't confront Caldwell directly. Instead, she'd watch, observe his patterns, find out where he went on those long afternoon meetings. The first 2 days gave her nothing. He'd leave by carriage, return before dark, always in the same composed, deliberate manner. But on the third day, just after the snow began to fall, she saw something unusual. Caldwell left alone, without his coachman. Elizabeth followed on foot, keeping far enough back that her dark cloak blended into the snow-laden hedges. Caldwell walked through the lower town, past the market, past the blacksmiths, until he reached a boarded-up chapel at the edge of the river. She hid behind a leaning fence post and watched him pry open the side door with a hidden key. Once inside, no light escaped, but faint chanting seeped through the cracks. It wasn't in any language she recognized, low, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Minutes passed. Then another figure arrived, shrouded in a hooded cloak, carrying something wrapped in white cloth. The figure slipped inside without knocking. The chanting swelled, then stopped suddenly. A bell rang once. Elizabeth's breath fogged in the freezing air. She waited, her toes numb, until Caldwell emerged an hour later. His gloves were stained, faintly but unmistakably, with something dark. He walked briskly toward town, leaving the chapel silent again. When she dared approach the building, she peeked through a loose board. The inside was dim, lit only by candles arranged in a spiral on the floor. At the center lay a wooden table, wet and glistening as though freshly cleaned. A bowl sat beside it, half filled with dark liquid. Elizabeth stepped back, her stomach turning. She wanted to leave, to run straight to the authorities, but how could she explain this without sounding mad? And who would believe her over a man like Caldwell, respected, wealthy, and untouchable? As she made her way back to the mansion, one thought chilled her more than the winter air. Whatever was happening inside that chapel, it was tied to the ledger, and the next ceremony might already have her name on it. The following evening, Elizabeth kept her distance from Caldwell, but her mind was a storm. She couldn't ignore the fact that the date next to her name in the ledger was fast approaching. Only 8 days away. She began searching the mansion for any clue that could connect the chapel to Caldwell's private affairs. The study was locked, as always, but she'd learned long ago that keys weren't the only way in. Beneath the hallway carpet was a loose floorboard that opened into a crawl space leading under the study's wall. It was dark and suffocating, the air thick with dust. She emerged behind a row of bookshelves and quickly got to work. The desk drawers held nothing unusual, invoices, invitations, personal letters, until she found a small wooden case tucked beneath stacks of papers. Inside were tiny glass vials, each labeled with a name and a date. Some were empty. Others contained a thick black residue. Her fingers shook as she turned the vials over. She recognized at least 3 names from the ledger, and every date matched the day that person was last seen alive. Then came a sound that froze her in place. The creak of the study door opening. Caldwell had returned. Elizabeth ducked behind the shelves, holding her breath. He stepped inside, humming faintly, and went straight to the desk. She watched through a sliver of light as he unlocked a hidden compartment beneath the drawer, removing a leather-bound book. Its pages, she could see from here, were filled with intricate symbols and diagrams of the human body. Caldwell whispered something over the book in that same strange rhythm she'd heard at the chapel. Then, as if sensing the room, he stopped mid-chant. He looked around slowly, his eyes narrowing toward the shelves. Elizabeth's pulse hammered. She forced herself to remain still, her back pressed against the cold wood. Caldwell stepped closer, his hand brushing the spines of the books, until a noise from the hallway distracted him. A knock from the maid announcing supper. He closed the compartment, pocketed a vial, and left without another glance. Elizabeth exhaled sharply, crawling back into the passageway. But as she replaced the floorboard and returned to her room, one truth became painfully clear. Whatever Caldwell was collecting in those vials, she might soon join the list of people who never returned. That night Elizabeth couldn't sleep. The wind rattled the mansion's shutters, but it was the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall that gnawed at her. Each chime felt like a countdown to the date carved beside her name in the ledger. She decided she couldn't wait any longer. Whatever Caldwell was doing, she had to know before it was too late, but she also knew she couldn't face him alone. In the early hours of the morning, she slipped into the servants' quarters and woke Thomas, the gardener's son, a young man with sharp instincts and a reputation for overhearing things. He'd grown up on the estate and had once told her that parts of the mansion were older than the town itself, built atop ruins that weren't meant for people. When she told him about the ledger and the vials, his face turned pale. "I've seen those," he admitted. "He keeps them locked away in the chapel basement. No one's supposed to go down there. Not after what happened last year." Elizabeth pressed him for details, but Thomas only shook his head. "The maid's brother, he went down there to find stolen wine, never came back. Caldwell told everyone he ran off to the city, but I heard the chanting that night, the same as you." They agreed to meet at midnight, when Caldwell would be in his private quarters. Thomas knew of a hidden trapdoor in the chapel's apse that led to the basement. When the hour came, the chapel was pitch black except for moonlight spilling through its tall windows. The floorboards groaned under their weight as they crept to the far end. Thomas found the trapdoor easily, its iron handle slick with cold moisture. The air that rushed up from below was damp and metallic, carrying the faint scent of rotting earth. Elizabeth climbed down first, her lantern casting shadows on the stone walls. The basement was much larger than she expected, a sprawling network of tunnels carved from bedrock. Along the walls were alcoves filled with jars, each holding strange organic shapes suspended in a dark fluid. Human. Animal. It was impossible to tell, and then they saw it. In the center of the room, under a beam of pale light, was a marble table, and on it the leather-bound book Caldwell had been reading. Its pages were open to a diagram labeled "The Vessel Exchange." Before they could get closer, footsteps echoed from above. The footsteps grew louder, deliberate, as if whoever was above knew exactly where to find them. Elizabeth doused the lantern, plunging the basement into near total darkness. Only the thin moonlight filtering through cracks in the floor above gave shape to the room. Thomas grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward a side tunnel. The air there was colder, the walls damp enough to leave streaks on their sleeves as they brushed past. Behind them, the trapdoor creaked open. Her voice drifted down. It wasn't Caldwell's. It was softer, almost coaxing. "I know you're here," it said. "You shouldn't have come." Elizabeth froze. She knew that voice. It belonged to Mrs. Harrow, the housekeeper, a woman who had always seemed fiercely loyal to Caldwell. Her footsteps descended the ladder, slow and steady. Then came the sound of something dragging across the floor, not wood, but metal scraping stone. They ducked into the shadows of a narrow alcove. From there, Elizabeth could just make out Mrs. Harrow's figure moving toward the marble table. She placed the metal object, a long, thin rod, onto the book, almost like it was a ritual offering. Then, without looking up, Mrs. Harrow spoke again. "He said you'd find it, Elizabeth, but you're too late. The exchange begins tomorrow." Elizabeth's pulse pounded in her ears. The date in the ledger. Tomorrow. Thomas looked at her, his face barely visible in the dark. She mouthed one word: "Run." They retreated deeper into the tunnel, keeping their steps light, careful. But the further they went, the less it felt like they were still under the chapel. The walls changed, from stone to something older, uneven, almost organic in shape. The air smelled of soil that hadn't seen daylight in centuries. A faint glow appeared ahead, bluish and unnatural. It pulsed slowly like a living thing. When they reached the source, Elizabeth's breath caught. Embedded in the tunnel wall was a massive translucent structure, a kind of cocoon with the faint outline of a human figure inside. The skin of the figure was stretched unnaturally tight, the eyes sealed shut as if in a dream. And yet, with each pulse of the light, the chest seemed to rise and fall. "Breathing," Thomas whispered. "That's not possible." Before she could answer, a voice echoed from the tunnel behind them. Caldwell's voice. "Elizabeth," he called, calm and almost welcoming. "You've found the heart of it." Caldwell's footsteps were unhurried, almost ceremonial as they approached. Elizabeth's instinct screamed to flee, but the cocoon's slow, rhythmic light held her in place. It was hypnotic, and she realized with a chill that her breathing had begun to match its pulse. Thomas grabbed her shoulder, shaking her out of it. "Don't look at it," he whispered. Caldwell emerged from the shadows, his face illuminated by that ghostly blue glow. His eyes, however, reflected no light at all. "You've come far enough to understand," he said softly. "This is the exchange, the preservation, the price of remaining untouched by time." Elizabeth's mind reeled. "You trap them?" she demanded. "In this thing?" "Not trap," Caldwell corrected, stepping closer to the cocoon. "We offer shelter. The body rests, the mind roams elsewhere. They become part of something greater." Thomas scoffed. "You mean they're dead?" Caldwell smiled thinly. "Do the dead breathe?" The figure inside shifted, subtly but unmistakably. The movement was slow, languid, like someone half waking from a deep sleep. Elizabeth's voice trembled. "Who is it?" Caldwell's expression softened, and for a fleeting moment there was something almost human in it. "It was my wife," he said. "The first to accept the gift. She will never decay, never suffer the cruelty of age, and tomorrow more will join her, willingly." Elizabeth thought of the ledger, the list of names, the dates, the way exchange repeated over and over. "You've been doing this for decades," she whispered. "Longer," Caldwell said. "I learned it from my father, he from his. Some call it an abomination, others call it salvation. Thomas stepped between them. We're leaving, and we're taking this evidence with us. But Caldwell didn't move to stop him. Instead, he stepped back and spread his hands. You could leave, he said, or you could stay and see the truth. One night and you'll understand. You'll never fear death again. The cocoon pulsed brighter, and the light spilled over Elizabeth's face. She felt warmth spread through her chest, a strange calm washing over her fear. For a moment, the thought of staying didn't seem so terrible. Then Thomas yanked her arm hard, breaking the spell. We're done here, he hissed. But as they turned to go, Caldwell's voice followed them, low and certain. You'll be back before dawn. Elizabeth and Thomas sprinted through the tunnel, hearts hammering in unison. Every step echoed off the walls, yet the sound felt muted, as if the air itself absorbed it. The glow of the cocoon faded behind them, but a faint pulse lingered, like the heartbeat of the mansion itself. The tunnels seemed to stretch endlessly. What had been a straight path now twisted into impossible angles, stairways appearing where there had been none. Elizabeth stumbled over a protruding root or stone, nearly losing her footing. Thomas grabbed her hand, pulling her up. The building, it's alive, he gasped. Or someone wants us to think it is. Elizabeth didn't respond. She was too focused on the shadows around them. The walls began to shift subtly, narrowing in one moment, widening in another, like the mansion was watching, reacting, testing them. Every corner seemed to hide movement, yet when she glanced, there was nothing. Finally, they reached a heavy wooden door. Relief surged, but it was short-lived. The door had no handle. She tried pushing, locked. The stone around the frame seemed fused, as if the building itself had sealed it shut. From behind came the soft whisper of Caldwell's voice, echoing through the tunnels, though he was nowhere in sight. You cannot leave, not until the ledger is complete. Elizabeth froze. The ledger! Thomas tugged at her arm. There has to be another way. There's always another way. They ran deeper into the labyrinth, hoping to find an exit, and then the chanting began again. Not Caldwell's this time, but layered voices, dozens of them, resonating through the stone. The pulse of the cocoon seemed to echo in their chests. The walls themselves began to sweat moisture, tiny rivulets of water forming on the rough stone. Shapes moved beneath the surface, as though trapped figures were pressing from within. Elizabeth stumbled into an alcove and discovered another trapdoor, this one smaller, concealed beneath a pile of rubble. Thomas looked at her. It could lead outside, or it could lead to something worse. Elizabeth didn't hesitate. She pried it open, and a foul, damp air escaped, carrying the scent of decay. Without a word, they climbed down into the darkness. Below, the tunnel opened into a cavern filled with skeletal remains, some old, some disturbingly fresh. Bones were stacked neatly in alcoves, while others were strewn across the floor. At the far end, a shadow moved, tall, thin, and impossibly still. Elizabeth's stomach turned. The realization hit her. Caldwell wasn't just preserving life, he was rewriting it. Elizabeth and Thomas crept through the cavern, hearts pounding, the stench of decay thick in their nostrils. Bones crunched beneath their feet, but the shadow at the far end did not move. It was tall, its features obscured by the darkness. Yet there was an unmistakable human shape, unnervingly still, yet somehow aware. A faint glow emanated from the shadow, illuminating vials like those Elizabeth had seen in the mansion, suspended in the air as if held by an unseen force. Each one contained a figure, partially formed, some infantile, some adult. Their limbs twitched subtly, as if waiting, watching, breathing. Thomas grabbed her arm. It's not possible, he whispered. Elizabeth's eyes fell on the ledger she still carried. Names she had read earlier flickered through her mind. The dates, the markings. She understood now. These were the missing people, the ones Caldwell had preserved for the so-called exchange. The shadow moved then, revealing Caldwell, his face calm, almost reverent. "You've come far, Elizabeth," he said, "and you've seen enough to understand why it must continue. You will see the ledger is not cruelty, it is perfection." Elizabeth stepped back. "Perfection," she spat. "You kill, imprison, and manipulate. That's not perfection, that's madness." Caldwell smiled, unbothered. "Madness, perhaps, or clarity. The world is weak, mortal. I offer stability, control, life beyond decay, my bloodline, my work. It must be continued." He gestured toward the floating vials. The figures inside twitched in unison. "The exchange begins tomorrow. One of these will be you." Thomas lunged forward, trying to snatch a vial. Caldwell's hand moved, and it was as if the air itself resisted him. The vials swayed, moving back into place, untouched by Thomas's grip. Elizabeth felt a cold rage rise within her. "I will stop you," she said. "Whatever it takes, I will end this." Caldwell tilted his head. "Many have tried, all failed, but you are clever, I'll give you that. Perhaps you will last longer." Suddenly, a tremor shook the cavern. Dust fell from the ceiling. The vials rattled violently, and for the first time, Caldwell's calm cracked. Elizabeth saw her chance. She grabbed Thomas's hand and ran toward a narrow tunnel she had noticed earlier. Behind them, Caldwell shouted, a low, furious sound, but the cavern had begun to shift, the walls closing in and opening unpredictably. They ran, deeper into darkness, uncertain if it would lead outside or into something far worse. The tunnel seemed endless, twisting in ways that defied logic. Elizabeth's lungs burned and her legs ached, but fear sharpened every sense. Behind them, Caldwell's voice echoed, distorted by the labyrinth, calling her name with a calm malice that chilled her more than the darkness itself. Thomas stumbled over a protruding rock, and Elizabeth yanked him upright. "Keep moving," she whispered, though her own voice trembled. Each step felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were trying to pull them back into the cavern. The tunnel widened briefly, revealing fragments of the cavern below. Elizabeth could see shadows of the suspended vials, their occupants swaying slightly, as if reacting to her presence. Some faces were distorted in agony, others serene, but all were trapped between life and death. All of this, Thomas gasped, voice low. "He's been doing it for decades, maybe centuries." Elizabeth didn't answer. Her mind was racing, piecing together the clues she had collected. The ledger, the library, the chapel, and now this cavern. Every detail pointed to one horrific truth. Caldwell's obsession with immortality was more than madness. It was systematic, deliberate, and meticulously recorded. A sharp wind blew through the tunnel, carrying whispers. At first, Elizabeth thought it was Thomas's imagination, but then she recognized the voices, faint echoes of the missing, trapped within the walls. They murmured her name, begged, pleaded, but their sound was incomprehensible, like a language half-remembered. Elizabeth pressed on, determined to reach the surface, and then the walls shifted again, revealing a hidden chamber. In the center, an old chest lay half-buried in dust. Curiosity and desperation pushed her forward. Inside she found letters, old and brittle, penned by Caldwell over decades. They detailed murders, manipulations, and experiments, confirming every suspicion she had. But one letter stood apart, addressed not to anyone alive but to Elizabeth herself. Caldwell's handwriting was meticulous, almost tender. "You will be the culmination of all I have built. Your blood will complete the circle. Accept your destiny or resist, and all will be lost." Elizabeth's stomach churned. This wasn't just about preservation. He planned for her to become part of the cycle, either willingly or by force. Thomas grabbed her shoulder. "We need to move now." As they approached the tunnel's exit, a chilling realization hit Elizabeth. The labyrinth was not random. It was alive, designed to delay, confuse, and break anyone who tried to escape. And yet ahead, a faint light promised the outside world, if they could survive Caldwell's reach. The faint light grew brighter as Elizabeth and Thomas pressed forward, but the tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly, as if time itself had slowed. The walls whispered again, faint echoes of those trapped in Caldwell's vials, their voices blending into a low, continuous hum. Elizabeth's hand tightened on the ledger. Every name, every date, every mark now felt like a countdown to her own fate. They rounded a corner, and the tunnel widened into an ancient chamber, far older than the mansion itself. Stone pillars stretched to a ceiling that disappeared into shadows. Symbols were carved into every surface, alchemical, occult, precise, marking the lineage of those who had come before her. At the center of the chamber, Caldwell awaited, framed in the cold, flickering light of a single lantern. His presence was imposing, unshaken by the cavern's distortions. In his hands, he held a small, ceremonial dagger, glinting faintly. "You've come far, Elizabeth," he said, calm yet commanding. "And now you see the truth. Everything, every sacrifice, every life. It's for the continuation of something greater. You are part of it." Elizabeth stepped forward, defiance and fear warring in her chest. "You're insane. This isn't continuation, it's slaughter. Innocent people trapped in your obsession." Caldwell tilted his head. "Innocence is a fleeting concept. Control, preservation, that is eternal. You could join willingly or resist, but resisting comes with consequences." He gestured to the floor, and the vials floated up from hidden alcoves, surrounding them in a luminous circle. Faces of the missing stared at her, some pleading, some indifferent, all suspended between life and death. Thomas raised his lantern, casting long shadows, but the vials resisted light, their glow growing stronger, oppressive. Elizabeth felt a wave of vertigo. Her pulse raced, and for a fleeting moment she wondered if they could survive at all. Then she remembered the letters, the ledger, the subtle weaknesses Caldwell had left in his plans. Using the lantern's light to distract him, Elizabeth grabbed Thomas's arm, pulling him toward a narrow passage she had noticed earlier. Caldwell's gaze followed them, but he didn't move immediately, almost as if he expected her to resist, to choose the cycle. They ran, hearts hammering, as the chamber itself seemed to groan in protest. The vial's glow dimmed behind them, the figures within remaining suspended, unreachable. At last, they reached a fissure leading to the surface. They scrambled upward, gasping, emerging into the cold night. Behind them, the mansion loomed silently. Elizabeth looked back one final time. The windows glowed faintly, and the wind carried faint, indistinct whispers. Caldwell had vanished. The ledger was safe, for now. But deep down, she knew one truth. The cycle wasn't over. The mansion, the tunnels, the vials. They waited. And one day someone else would stumble into the darkness Caldwell had created, where eternity and horror intertwined. The story of Elizabeth Hartwell ended that night, or at least her escape did. But the shadows of Caldwell's legacy lingered, whispering in forgotten corridors, untouched graves and hidden tomes. The dark truth remained. Some secrets aren't meant to be unearthed, yet curiosity always finds a way.